What's up, my intrepid students and YouTubers? We are continuing my little ES build series here. Before I begin deploying this project into random places, I'm going to show y'all how we're going to rip out Bootstrap out of this project and put in something like Tailwind and mess with another ES build plugin. It should be pretty straightforward, and it might be one or two workflow changes from what I remember. Now, this is a series of videos, so if you're wondering how I got here, you can always go and clone this boilerplate from a description in the comment down below and follow along to rip out Bootstrap and put in Tailwind. I end up using a lot of Tailwind, building my own components, and sometimes using a plugin called Daisy UI. But I'll show y'all how to remove Bootstrap, which we use in our course, which is why this is part of our just boilerplate that I've coded here. And yeah, like I code this whole thing in this playlist series. So the three previous videos, I suggest you go and watch them because I start with an empty directory and this is what I wind up with across those videos. I build out all the configurations, a React front end, an Express backend, and add some optimizations, miniature optimizations for deployment, production versus development, and talk about all the stuff along the way and the choices we made. Every one of these files, everything except node modules, is written, and package lock is written by ourselves and filled out ourselves, and we talk about what, why, and where. So some minor changes. I don't think if I did this on camera or off camera. Yeah, this needs to be public / index HTML. For some reason, I don't know why it requires the additional public right there, even though you would think it would look in whatever directory it ended up serving. But with this fallback property, you have to include the name of the folder where your static bundle assets, or your static files are going to be found. This fallback will make sure to enable your React router DOM or TANstack router to and if 404s and not having esbuild handle the 404, we tell esbuild let our index HTML be just served like before, and our JavaScript routers will then read the location and load the appropriate code as needed. So that change right there is what we need to ensure that the correct fallback happens on esbuild serving the correct file. There we go. So that's going to fix a bug I encountered with a student just yesterday, as a matter of fact. Now, in terms of what we have to do to rip Bootstrap out, let's go ahead and get underway. I don't want this one to dilly-dally as long as some of my other ones did. So here we go. And before I say anything, as always, like, comment, subscribe, do all the fun YouTube stuff. If you have anything you in particular want me to try and deep dive or look into with esbuild, let me know. I'll be happy to do so. Otherwise, stay tuned for some videos where I just deploy this to random places to see how easy or not easy it is. So Sass was used with Bootstrap, so in our case, I'm going to go ahead and rip that out, surgically remove that, and our two import statements right there as well, so that cleans up this file very quickly. We need to do the same thing for our production file because that's going to be a little bit different here moving forward. So I'll go ahead and remove this plugin as well. There we go. And voila, we've ripped it out from our development and our production workflow. Next thing I need to do is also remove it from our styles. So what's actually going to happen here when we get, I'm going to go ahead and just reuse this. Rather than being a Sass file, I'm going to switch to a vanilla CSS file. We're going to remove the Bootstrap code there, and what Tailwind needs to have is we have these @Tailwind directives, where I think we have @base, I want to say. Hold on. Looking at their documentation on off screen, make sure I remember what it is. Yeah, it's base. And we have these directives that their PostCSS code will happen to help us with. So it's built on top of PostCSS, which is a JavaScript way of processing CSS code, and all these crazy cool things we could do with it that aren't otherwise part of vanilla CSS. So PostCSS is a way of JavaScript transforming our CSS for us. So Tailwind will use that on top of its own process with these Tailwind directives to import and use all the juicy utility class names and all other fun stuff that's provided to us by Tailwind itself. So that will be our replacement of our Sass file to app.scss. We remove the S, place in these directives, these Tailwind directives, and we should be good to go on this file. Now, I need to fix my import statement over in my index.tsx. Again, with PostCSS and esbuild, it should know how to automatically understand how to include this in our bundle. Now, unlike the other plugins that the Sass plugin, which did have the option to inject it via a style tag in the head of our HTML, this will actually just use the default Tailwind and PostCSS configurations to generate a bundled static CSS file that we link and reference in the head of our HTML, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. So that right there is a big change we have to do in our index.tsx. Well, honestly, if it just builds it, we might not have to include this. I'll double check that when we go through here. Because again, I remember changing this, but I don't remember testing without it. And we'll maybe just do it live and learn together. So yeah, in our app, let's go ahead and just change something here. I'll change this to like container for some quick, I mean, that's also a Bootstrap class name, so it's actually not a good idea. How about we do text red 700 and BG green 200? Just some really goofy looking colors for our header, and we're going to very, very, very quickly know if Tailwind is enabled or not on our project. So switching some class names around to see if that works the way we expect it to. Okay. Do I have the right node environment? Okay, I do. Yeah. So what we're going to do now is we need to uninstall a couple of packages that I have available here. So we're going to uninstall our Bootstrap dependency. We're going to uninstall our Sass dependency because we don't need that anymore. And I believe it was, what was it? esbuild-sass plugin. I should have looked at it before I removed it from my import list. It was, yeah, esbuild-sass, esbuild-sass plugin. We're going to remove those three, I believe is all we need to remove. Yeah, that looks correct. Now, in development dependencies, the next things I'm going to add are obviously npm ID. We need TailwindCSS. We're going to need PostCSS as our PostCSS processor. I believe we need this installed. If not, we'll double check here. But and then esbuild has a plugin that I found. Now, this one's coded from like a year ago. It does have like a few thousand weekly downloads, and this is one of the more simple ones I found to use. Again, this one seems to have less community support than Sass does, but we're going to go ahead and leverage and use it anyway. So if you have a better one you like, please link it in the comments down below, since I didn't have a lot of luck on the NPM registry finding one that was like really up to date, really modern, and this one, you know, had the best quality that I saw, so we're going to use it in our case here. And again, it's more about just getting this crap working, and that's the important part that matters. Oh, autoprefixer. Autoprefixer is a prefixer is one of those nice post-CSS plugins that make sure that the CSS we generate into our bundle will include auto-prefix rules, where rules might vary across browsers. If it's called one thing in Safari versus another thing in Chrome Firefox, then autoprefixer is going to make sure to have those problems already handled for us. So we're going to go ahead and add that as well, as it's part of the whole process of Tailwind CSS. But that should be all we need, if I'm not mistaken, to go ahead and get it up and running. And I did promise y'all I'll show y'all a plugin that I like to use, and it'll be another quick test on Tailwind to make sure it's set up the way we want. Now, I'm not going to add a build CSS here. That's going to be part of our bundling process. We're actually going to head back to my development bundle in esbuild. I'm going to import our new friend. We're going to call it PostCSS from esbuild-postcss. This doesn't have a lot of options from what I saw. I went and looked at their interface for options, and it just presents a string array, so I'm not entirely sure how that's going to help us, but we're simply going to invoke PostCSS as a function as one of our plugins, and believe it or not, that's all we really need to get it enabled in our process here. So the same thing for production. I'm going to swap into here, add it to my list of plugins, and copy and paste the exact same import statement. So now we have a production bundle ready to go as well. So it is going to produce an out file of bundle CSS compared to bundle.js. That's what the inner code of this PostCSS plugin will do. It's basically going to read that out file and amend a CSS extension to it instead. Yeah, so that's what we need for our configuration right there. In terms of what we need for other configs, config.js, we can have a simple configuration file for PostCSS. We're going to tell it that there's a configuration object. We'll have a list of plugins that include Tailwind CSS with no additions here. And we're going to be using autoprefixer as well with no additions here. So that's, again, this PostCSS configuration is ultra simple. We're telling it it's going to be using Tailwind and autoprefixer in tandem. And this is exactly what you're going to find on, as of this video's air date, basically. The same code you will find on Tailwind CSS own documentation for their latest version. For Tailwind.config.js, we need to include a couple things as well. There's a little tip you can do where you can actually bring in a type into this vanilla.js file, where we're going to say bring in from Tailwind CSS their config type for any kind of additional support in terms of IntelliSense and autocompletes and stuff like that. So we'll have export this configuration object. We're going to tell it the content that it needs to look for will be found in our source folder, our client folder, and then any file and folder structure from there that end in a TS or TSX extension. That's going to be a safe bet there. And we're also going to say that, hey, in our public index HTML, in case we write any CSS inside there directly, or class names, also be looking inside of there for class names to collect before they get purged. Because in the current process of Tailwind, we don't have to supply purge rules. Instead, we tell it what our content is. It collects all the class names that our content uses and purges the rest that it doesn't need. So our bundle will only be the class names that are required for our code to work. So that's how it's going to be optimized both in development and in production. It does that JIT, or just in time bundling or processing, or whatever the correct term is for it. It basically makes sure that what we output at the time we need it is exactly what we need and nothing else, right? So that's going to be the content we're going to specify. Just for some practice here, let's go ahead and customize the theme. That container class in Tailwind doesn't automatically center or add padding to anything, but if I add a boolean of center true and a padding of like 1.5 rem, just something really obvious to see if it works or not, I'm just adding these classes, these extensions here, if you will, these additional theme values to our container class to really see if all these things are configured and plugged in correctly. Outside of theme or inside of theme, we're not extending or adding anything, but we're going to go ahead and add that extend keyword there so it so it's prepared in case we add anything there. And did I just delete something somewhere? Am I missing something? Hold on. What did I just mess up? Why is it angry at me? Oh yeah, I am missing a curly brace. There we go. Whoops. My bad, y'all. Then outside of theme, we're gonna add a plugins array. Dang it, stop it. We're gonna add a plugins array that I will eventually add some plugins into. But for now, let's go ahead and just leave it empty. That way, when I get around to it, I can actually add it here later. But yeah, those are our two configuration files, a PostCSS config, a Tailwind config. We've added our tool for PostCSS as a plugin into esbuild. We've converted our source client styles to use the Tailwind directives, which it and PostCSS should understand how to handle that. And then I have changed this import statement, which I'm going to double check on this here in a minute. And then our app here as well has these class names. But like I said, to my knowledge, I didn't find a convenient plugin that allowed us to do an inline styling, meaning please inject our CSS directly into a style tag in the head of the HTML. So what's going to happen actually in this current new build process is that it's going to produce a new bundle.css file here. So let's see if that is going to work the way I expect. So if we do an npm run dev, it indeed builds just fine. I got no errors, which is a nice change of pace. So let's go ahead and check it out. Yep, there it is. So it built a CSS file that has all of the CSS resets that Tailwind does by default. And if we scroll down, this file is actually very small. I mean, only 369 lines of CSS code with vertical spacing and stuff like that is nothing. And that's because the only two class names that it found across all of my files in the client and the public index HTML and the source client only included container and only included these two particular names. So it looks like it bundled and purged all unnecessary class names correctly, which honestly is pretty freaking awesome it did that. So unlike our other projects where we had this simply working and I could go to localhost 8000 and see it, we can see here that it didn't actually load the CSS in there. So out of curiosity, it should bundle it if I add it there, but we'll see if that's needed or not. But what I am going to do is head on over here and just link a CSS file manually, old school style, to say, hey, there should be a bundle CSS that's also available to link as a static file to this document. So there we go. There is our lovely Tailwind, definitely working with that background and text color. The container has the padding. The container is also centered, which gives us a very quick indicator that my configuration for Tailwind is also set correctly. So yeah, that is how quickly and easily we can surgically remove, seems to be my favorite key phrase, Bootstrap and Sass, and quickly put in PostCSS, autoprefixer, and Tailwind CSS and get it generating a Tailwind style project in no time at all. I love it. This is like a huge mess for me when dealing with Webpack and things like that and the appropriate loaders, but esbuild just has a lot of this stuff built in by default with a couple of opinions. So yeah, that's really all you have to do to get this all working. That's right, the additional plugin. So because I know my theme is correctly being adjusted for this little configuration file I have, let's actually experiment with a particular plugin. I told you I was going to show y'all one of my personal favorites. Let's see if I can get it working. So I'm going to stop this project and install a new one. We're going to be calling it npm I dev dependency tailwind css-debug-screens. This handy dandy little debug screens plugin does something that I cannot live without. Let's go ahead and start this project back up again. Okay. Actually, I need to restart it because I'm going to change it here. So what we're going to do is do a inline require. That's how their documentation shows to do it. To add our debug screens plugin here in our plugin array, I'm going to stop it so it just rebuilds with the new configuration to make sure it's there. And the way this thing does its job is by adding a class name to the body of our HTML document, which we can do directly inside of here. This is a quick test to see if it works, called debug-screens. This plugin adds this class name that does a very convenient thing, if I got it done correctly here. So yeah, please look in the... No. There. I was like, please look in the bottom left corner down there for my screen size. So what this plugin does is it gives me, there's a lovely arrow pointing to it in case you didn't see it. This plugin gives me a very convenient breakpoint screen size, so I know what screen size I'm at when I'm trying to do any kind of mobile responsiveness. Of course, now it moves somewhere else, but you know how it's like. Right, so right down there on this view of an iPad Air in vertical form, right, it showed us that we have a screen size, come on now, a screen size of medium down there in that corner, right over here. So it says screen size medium, so I know what my breakpoints are. If I happen to take this, and if I can rotate the tablet, how do you do that again? I forgot. Oh my god, I forgot how to do a rotate to... Goodness gracious. I know there's a way to rotate this thing. That's embarrassing. I forgot how to do it like on camera here. That you can like say, hey, I want to rotate this device. Yeah, well, you know, there should be a way to do it. I feel dumb that I can't remember. Responsive, so you can mess with the screen size. But yeah, the whole point is with that plugin is that if you're wondering, hey, where do I need to adjust the padding, the margin, a grid column size, or something like that, this debug screens class name down here just adds like a z-index position div that just shows you what breakpoint you are on, and it's one of my favorite ones. Now, the big problem is you have to remember to remove this before you actually push to deployment, otherwise you're going to forget. So we could always just leverage like a use effect or something like that inside of our code, just have like a top level, like we have this one to fetch our data, but like, you know, we can have a separate one that says, hey, in the event that our process.node.env global variable is development, because remember, we defined this variable inside of our bundler, right? So it's almost like the Webpack define plugin. We defined it in development to be the value development, which means we could utilize it here and say like our document body.classlist.add, so we can add debug screens in our development bundle, but not worry about it in our production bundle. So that will make sure that it's there. And as you can see, like I removed it from the index HTML over here, so it's not in that body class name, but now I add it conditionally from this use effect. So in production, I don't have to worry about that ugly div appearing on my deployed website, which I've done before. That's why I said remember to remove it from your body somehow, or only add it in a specific development scenario there. So there you go. That's a nifty way to use a plugin with Tailwind that I feel like I cannot live without, right? So yeah, that really wraps it up for this video. Like I said, this one will hopefully be a lot shorter than other ones. I might experiment a little off camera here with something, or maybe pause the video and then cut myself in just a moment because I'm curious about a couple things on this build setup, but that's what you're going to do if you want to use Tailwind. It'll make your projects feel really sleek and modern. I'm a huge fan of Tailwind, just building out my own components here. So I'll see y'all in a second. Let's see if I can close out Epic Pen because it hogs up the screen over there. All right, I'm going to possibly edit this video. So either way, I'll come and say goodbye here in a split second. So let's see what happens. And with the magic of editing, I had a chance. There's a weird accent coming out. A chance to actually experiment with a couple things off screen to make sure I point something out to y'all. So our bundler will not correctly bundle everything if we don't tell it to include the CSS file there for Tailwind, which means all this will now break and it won't know what all that stuff is. So you do have to have this import statement here because, again, our esbuild only knows we would have to reconfigure our development entry points to also include that CSS file so it would properly bundle and output it without us having to write the import statement. But this is more in line with what you're going to do with other frameworks, like whether you use like Gatsby, Remix, Next, Vite, Create React App. They all typically recommend you do it this way from Tailwind's own documentation. So yeah, you need to have that import statement there indeed, because that way it includes it in the bundling process. Otherwise, you'll have to go and adjust the esbuild config, which we don't want to do. We want to keep it nice and simple in my case, right? Something else I did want to point out as well that's very, very nifty is that let's go ahead and add a button down here. And we're going to give this button a class name of button primary, something that's kind of bootstrap-ish. It's going to be a button that says test, and we know that, well, primary actually has no class name correspondence in Tailwind. So it doesn't look like a very pretty button, but it does exist right there. So we could add all of our class names here, but I wanted to make sure that all features or aspects of Tailwind were actually working the way we expected them to, meaning they have the ability to what's called extract classes. Now, it would recommend to not do it this way, but you'll see that a lot of developers tend to approach and like it this way anyway, even though Tailwind's own documentation tells you that's not the best idea. So I'm curious to see if this will work. There is a directive called @layer. It's like a function and directive inside of Tailwind that tells it, hey, where do I want to group some custom applied CSS rules to make sure specificity and stuff like that isn't going to be compromised. So, this method that we're doing here is meant to add custom class names that compose other CSS class names from Tailwind. So, yeah, it's actually a pretty cool way to take existing utilities and build a component out of it. So we can say, hey, I want a class name selector of button primary, and I want button primary to basically make a decent looking button, and that's going to be done via the following CSS. We're going to write the class name. So again, this is the downside, because they're like, well, this kind of is not the point of Tailwind CSS class names, where you're now coming up with your own class names to do what they already do. But this apply directive will very quickly tell us if it's correctly working or not. So let's build out a decent looking button here. We'll do one of these, text white, font semi-bold, rounded LG, shadow, medium. Make this button look kind of cool, I'm saying over here. We're going to test a action of hover BG blue, and it'll make a slightly darker color. If it's focused, we're going to remove the outline on it, outline Monorepo, because we're going to do we're going to do a focus. Sorry, I can't new line this, folks, but thankfully it's above my head in this time. Ring-2, focus. Ring blue 400, focus. Ring opacity. Is that a thing we can do? Opacity. And we'll make it not like fully opaque. Let's do 75. 75. So yeah, we're going to make this button primary class name apply all of these class names you would otherwise have to write and make into its own component file, like extract a function called button that renders all these class names minus the color changes you might want to pass in for yourself or blah, blah, blah. But, ooh, that backfired. Oh no, we blew something up, folks. What do we do here? So I tested this off screen with no issue here. We have our CSS sheet imported. We have a button with class name button primary, which wouldn't break anything. I don't believe I have a syntax error here. I could just take what in from my notes and paste it over to see if I do have a syntax error, but we should be able to do @layer components. That's correct. Curly braces, button primary, @apply, and what do we break here? There is a typo. Oh my god. Well, I should have just read the error instead of just assuming I knew better. I mean, it's classic developer, right? So it's telling us that this is a custom class that it can't find and the whole thing breaks, which is kind of a nice thing for it to do here. It's saying that it can't find rounded LG as a class name that's available over yonder. So yeah, let's try that again. And there we go. we have successfully made this beautiful looking button right here that has a nice focus outline around it as well when it's clicked on. So there we go. That is that really confirms that we have Tailwind configured and added correctly to our project. We can even use this apply directive, which again on the React subreddit I see more and more folks saying this is what they do anyway. This is kind of what Daisy UI does for you. It adds button primary, secondary, etc. So this is kind of how you'd write it yourself if you wanted to. But again, this kind of goes against the spirit of a utility class frame or utility CSS kit like Tailwind, that you're supposed to add all these class names to things and maybe like extract it out to a button, a function called button that returns this styled button for us, and we can pass some text and props into it instead. So, your mileage will vary. I just wanted to point out that our plugins are working just fine. All of our cool Tailwind features are online and working, so you have the world of all your normal Tailwind CSS, PostCSS tools at your disposal to generate and write all this stuff. So again, make sure y'all like, comment, and subscribe. If you're interested in learning more about React development, front-end development, or back-end database development, then subscribe. Then find a link in the description down below to join our community membership for $25 a month. You get access to those free courses, as well as a TypeScript and database course that I'm currently in the works on and should be done within a month. So join up, come bother me in Discord and ask for YouTube content or help coding on whatever you happen to be coding on web development terms. So peace, and I'll see you all in the next video where we try and deploy this sucker to a couple different places.